I was fired just 3 days before my $56,000 commission was supposed to hit my account. My boss thought he had calculated everything perfectly to swallow that money whole. But what he didn't know was that he had signed his own trap in the contract I had carefully laid out. And in just 90 days, that very trap transformed me from a fired employee into my former company's biggest competitor, turning my boss into the unemployed one. My name is Madeline Carter, and I'm 32 years old. I've been working in B2B sales for the better part of a decade, specializing in logistics consulting. My Irish roots gave me a stubborn streak that served me well in negotiations, though it also meant I didn't back down from fights I probably should have avoided. That Friday morning in November would prove to be both my biggest professional disaster and the catalyst for the most satisfying revenge I've ever orchestrated. The conference room at Maxwell & Holt Solutions had always felt cold, but that morning it seemed positively Arctic. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows across the polished mahogany table that had witnessed countless career-defining moments. I'd been summoned there at 8:30 sharp by Richard Bowman, our director of sales, a man whose smile never quite reached his calculating gray eyes. Richard sat across from me, his fingers steepled in front of his face like he was praying, though I suspected any prayers he offered were decidedly selfish in nature. His perfectly pressed navy suit and geometric tie spoke to his obsession with control and appearances. Everything about Richard was calculated, from his weekly manicures to the way he positioned his Mont Blanc pen exactly parallel to his legal pad during meetings. "Madeline," he began, his voice carrying that false warmth that made my skin crawl. "I'm sure you're wondering why I called you in here so early." I wasn't wondering at all. The writing had been on the wall for weeks. Richard had been making pointed comments about restructuring and optimizing our human resources. He'd been scheduling mysterious meetings with HR and the C-suite executives, always with that same predatory gleam in his eyes. "Actually, Richard, I have a pretty good idea," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. His smile widened, showing teeth that were too white and too perfect. "Always the sharp one, aren't you?" "Well, then this shouldn't come as a complete shock." He slid a manila envelope across the table toward me. "The company is restructuring. Your position is being eliminated, effective immediately." The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been expecting them. 11 months of my life had been poured into the Ellington Industries deal, the largest contract our company had ever been positioned to win. $56,000 in commission was supposed to be my reward, money I'd already mentally allocated toward paying off my student loans and finally taking that trip to Ireland I'd been promising myself for years. "What about the Ellington contract?" I managed to ask, my throat suddenly dry. "That deal closes on Monday. I've been working on it for almost a year." Richard's expression didn't change, but I caught the brief flash of satisfaction in his eyes. "The company will handle the transition. Mr. Ellington will be in good hands, I assure you. The client doesn't need you specifically, Madeline. They need our services." The casual cruelty of his words was like salt in an open wound. I'd spent countless hours building a relationship with Marshall Ellington, traveling to 3 different states to meet with his team, crafting proposals that addressed his company's unique challenges. Richard acted like I was just an interchangeable cog in the machine. "I need you to clean out your desk and return your company property," Richard continued, his tone becoming more businesslike. "Security will escort you out once you're finished. Your final paycheck will be processed according to company policy." I stared at the envelope, my mind racing. "And my commission on the Ellington deal?" "What commission?" Richard's smile turned predatory. "You won't be an employee when that contract is finalized. The commission structure is quite clear about requiring active employment status." That's when it hit me. This wasn't about restructuring or company efficiency. This was about money. Richard had timed my termination to steal my commission, probably planning to claim credit for closing the deal himself. The calculated nature of it made my blood boil, but I forced myself to remain calm. "I see," I said quietly, standing up and taking the envelope. "Well, I suppose that's that." Richard seemed almost disappointed by my lack of dramatic reaction. "I'm sure you understand, Madeline. It's just business." "Of course," I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Just business." The walk to my desk felt like a death march. My colleagues avoided eye contact, though I could feel their stares burning into my back. Word traveled fast in our office, and everyone knew what a summons to Richard's conference room meant on a Friday morning. I packed my personal items mechanically: the framed photo of my parents from their anniversary dinner, the coffee mug my niece had painted for me, the small succulent that had somehow survived 3 years of office air conditioning. As I was boxing up the last of my things, Sarah Chen from accounting approached my desk. Sarah was one of the few people in the office I considered a genuine friend, someone who'd cover for me when I needed to leave early for client meetings and who always remembered to save me the good pastries from company events. "I can't believe they're doing this to you," she whispered, glancing around to make sure Richard wasn't within earshot. "Everyone knows you're the one who landed Ellington." "Apparently that doesn't matter," I replied, taping up the box. "This is so wrong. Madeline, is there anything you can do?" I paused, considering her question. "Maybe. I need to think." Sarah squeezed my shoulder. "If you need anything at all, you have my number." The security guard who escorted me out was at least kind enough to carry my box to my car. As I drove away from the building that had been my professional home for 4 years, I caught sight of Richard watching from his office window, that same satisfied smile playing across his lips. But Richard had made one crucial mistake. In his eagerness to steal my commission and humiliate me, he'd forgotten that I was the one who had negotiated every detail of the Ellington contract. I was the one who had spent hours on the phone with Marshall Ellington, learning about his company's values and priorities. And I was the one who had suggested including a very specific clause that Richard had signed without reading carefully. The drive home was a blur of rage and disbelief. I'd given Maxwell and Holt 4 years of my life, missing family dinners and weekend plans to chase deals that enriched everyone but me. I'd been loyal to a fault, even when Richard had tried to undermine me in meetings or claim credit for my ideas. And this was how they repaid me. My apartment felt different when I walked in carrying that pathetic cardboard box. It was barely noon on a Friday, and I should have been putting the finishing touches on the Ellington presentation for Monday's closing meeting. Instead, I was unemployed, betrayed, and furious. I poured myself a generous glass of wine despite the early hour and sat down at my kitchen table with the Ellington contract. It was a thick document, full of legal terminology and specific clauses that had been negotiated over months of back-and-forth discussions. But I knew exactly what I was looking for. There, on page 47, was the clause I'd fought for during our final negotiation session. Marshall Ellington had been concerned about becoming too dependent on any single consulting firm. He'd seen other companies get locked into exclusive relationships that became more expensive and less effective over time. At his suggestion, I'd included what we called the Consultant Designation Clause. The language was dry and legal, but the meaning was crystal clear. If Ellington Industries specifically requested to work with a designated consultant, and that consultant was no longer employed by the contracted firm, Ellington had the right to terminate the contract without penalty and engage the consultant directly. Richard had signed it without question, probably assuming it was standard boilerplate language. He'd been so focused on the financial terms and commission structure that he'd glossed over what he considered minor operational details. But this wasn't a minor detail. This was my insurance policy. With shaking hands, I reached for my phone and dialed Marshall Ellington's direct number. He'd given it to me 6 months ago after we'd finally broken through his initial skepticism and established real rapport. Marshall was old-school successful, the kind of man who'd built his manufacturing empire through handshake deals and personal relationships. "Madeline." His gravelly voice came through the phone after 2 rings. "I was just thinking about you. Monday's going to be a big day. Mr. Ellington, I need to tell you something important. I was terminated this morning." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. When Marshall spoke again, his tone had changed completely. "What did you just say?" Maxwell and Holt let me go this morning. They're planning to proceed with our contract using different personnel. Like hell they are. Marshall's voice carried the kind of authority that had built his company from a garage workshop into a $100 million operation. We made this deal with you, not with some company. You think I spent all those months talking to you about our vision just to hand it over to some stranger? My heart pounded as I heard the anger in his voice. Sir, I understand your frustration, but legally speaking, the contract is with Maxwell and Holt. Is it, though? Marshall's tone suggested he was already thinking like the shrewd businessman who'd survived 4 decades in manufacturing. Didn't we include some language about consultant designation? I specifically remember insisting on that. We did include that language, yes. Then you better dust off your resume and start your own company, because Ellington Industries is about to become your first client. I'll have my legal team review the contract today, and I suspect we'll be terminating our relationship with Maxwell and Holt very soon. After I hung up with Marshall, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the contract pages spread across my table. The wine had made me bold enough to make the call, but now reality was setting in. If Marshall followed through on his threat, I'd need to be ready to actually deliver on the promises I'd made. That's when I remembered Derek Nolan. Derek and I had dated briefly in law school before we realized we were better as friends than lovers. He'd gone on to specialize in contract law, building a reputation for being both brilliant and ruthless when it came to protecting his clients' interests. If anyone could help me navigate the legal complexities of what I was contemplating, it was Derek. Madeline Carter. Derek's familiar voice carried a note of surprise when he answered his phone. To what do I owe the pleasure? I need a lawyer, Derek, and probably a friend. Well, you're in luck, because I happen to be both. What's going on? I explained the situation, reading him the relevant contract language and describing Richard's betrayal. Derek listened without interruption, occasionally making small humming sounds that I recognized as his thinking noises. This is beautiful, he said finally. Absolutely beautiful. Your boss essentially signed his own termination letter without realizing it. So the clause is enforceable? More than enforceable, it's bulletproof. Assuming Ellington wants to invoke it, Maxwell and Holt has no legal recourse whatsoever. They can terminate you as an employee, but they can't prevent you from fulfilling contractual obligations that were specifically negotiated to allow for this exact scenario. But I'd need to have my own company. That's the easy part. I can have you incorporated by Tuesday, LLC or corporation. Whatever makes more sense for your tax situation. The hard part is making sure you're ready to actually perform the consulting work without the infrastructure you had at Maxwell and Holt. I thought about that. Maxwell and Holt had provided office space, administrative support, and access to proprietary logistics software. But the core of what I did was relationship building and strategic thinking. Those were skills I could take anywhere. I can handle the work, I said. The question is whether Marshall is serious about pulling the contract. From what you've told me about him, he sounds like the kind of man who values loyalty and personal relationships above corporate convenience. If you built the relationship, I think you did. He's probably already drafting the termination letter. Derek was right. By Saturday afternoon, I had 3 missed calls from Richard and 2 voicemails that grew progressively more frantic. I didn't return them. Instead, I spent the weekend researching business licenses, tax implications, and the logistical requirements for running my own consulting firm. On Sunday evening, my phone rang with an unknown number. Madeline, it's Marshall Ellington. I wanted to give you a heads up. My lawyers reviewed the contract, and we're terminating with Maxwell and Holt first thing Monday morning. I'm hoping Carter Strategic Consulting will be ready to take over the engagement. Carter Strategic Consulting. I liked the sound of that. We'll be ready, Mr. Ellington. Good. Because I also wanted you to know that Richard Bowman has been calling my office all weekend, trying to convince me that you're having some kind of breakdown and that I shouldn't trust you with our business. The audacity of Richard's lies made my hands clench into fists. What did you tell him? I told him that if Maxwell and Holt thought so little of the person who'd spent 11 months earning our trust, then maybe we'd overestimated their judgment in general. Marshall's chuckle was dry and humorless. He didn't seem to like that very much. Monday morning arrived with all the drama I'd expected. Derek had worked over the weekend to expedite my business formation. And by 9 a.m., Carter's Strategic Consulting officially existed as a legal entity. By 10 a.m., Marshall's legal team had delivered termination notice to Maxwell and Holt, citing the consultant designation clause and requesting immediate transition of all project materials to me. Richard called my cell phone 17 times that day. I didn't answer any of them. The emails started arriving around noon. The first few were attempts at professional communication, asking me to discuss the situation and find a mutually beneficial resolution. But as the day wore on and I continued to ignore his outreach, Richard's messages became increasingly desperate and accusatory. The email that arrived at 4:30 p.m. crossed several lines. Madeline, your unprofessional behavior is damaging our client relationship and potentially exposing the company to legal liability. If you think you can steal our client and destroy 4 years of relationship building, you're mistaken. I have documentation of your performance issues and concerning behavior patterns that suggest you may not be mentally stable enough to handle the pressure of running your own business. I strongly advise you to reconsider this course of action before you embarrass yourself and harm your professional reputation permanently. I forwarded the email to Derek with a note. Is this the kind of thing we can use later? His response was immediate. Screenshot everything. This is evidence of defamation and intentional interference with business relationships. Keep him talking. But I didn't need to keep Richard talking. He was doing a fine job of that himself. By Tuesday, word had spread through the industry network that Ellington Industries had terminated their contract with Maxwell and Holt to work directly with me. 3 former colleagues called to congratulate me. 2 competitors called to see if I was interested in partnership opportunities. And Sarah from accounting called to warn me that Richard was telling anyone who would listen that I'd stolen proprietary information and violated my non-disclosure agreement. He's completely unhinged, Sarah whispered into the phone during what I assumed was her lunch break. He called an all-hands meeting yesterday afternoon just to talk about loyalty and professional ethics. Everyone knows he's talking about you, and everyone knows he's full of it. Is the company backing him up? That's the weird part. The executives have been really quiet about the whole thing. I think they're trying to distance themselves from whatever Richard did to make Ellington drop us. That made sense. Losing a client the size of Ellington Industries would be a significant financial blow to Maxwell and Holt, especially if word got out that they'd lost the client due to mismanaging their sales staff. The last thing they'd want would be for other major clients to start questioning their internal practices. Wednesday morning brought a certified letter from Maxwell and Holt's legal team. Derek reviewed it and summarized the contents with barely contained glee. They're threatening to sue you for breach of contract, theft of trade secrets, and tortious interference with business relationships, he explained. It's a beautiful piece of legal fiction. They have no grounds for any of these claims, and their own contract language explicitly allows for exactly what you've done. So we ignore it. Better than that, we respond with our own legal documentation pointing out that they terminated you in bad faith to avoid paying a commission you'd already earned, and that their current actions constitute defamation and harassment. I'll draft something that will make their lawyers advise them to shut up and go away. Derek's response letter was a masterpiece of legal intimidation. He systematically demolished each of Maxwell and Holt's claims, cited specific contract language that protected my actions, and warned them that continued harassment would result in a countersuit for damages to my professional reputation and business prospects. But Richard wasn't ready to give up. Thursday afternoon, I received a call from Tom Harrison, a procurement director at Morrison Steel, one of my former clients. Tom and I had worked together on 3 separate projects over the past 2 years, and I'd always considered him a professional ally. Madeline, I'm calling because I got a strange call earlier today from someone at Maxwell and Holt, a Richard Bowman. My stomach dropped. What did he say? He wanted to warn me that you'd been terminated for performance issues and that I should be careful about working with you in the future. He suggested that you might not be entirely stable. The audacity of Richard's campaign against me was breathtaking. Not content with stealing my commission and trying to intimidate me legally, He was now actively trying to destroy my professional reputation. Tom, I hope you know that's not true. Of course I know it's not true. That's why I'm calling you. The whole conversation was so inappropriate that I felt like I needed to give you a heads up. This guy is clearly trying to sabotage you. I appreciate the warning. For what it's worth, if you're starting your own consulting practice, Morrison Steele would be interested in working with you directly. You know our systems better than anyone. After hanging up with Tom, I called Derek again. He's defaming me to my professional network, I explained. This goes way beyond simple harassment. Perfect, Derek replied, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. Document everything. Get statements from anyone he's contacted. We're going to bury this guy. But before Derek could take legal action, the situation resolved itself in a way I never could have anticipated. Friday morning, I was reviewing project timelines for the Ellington engagement when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Sarah's number. Madeline, you're not going to believe what just happened. Try me. Richard just got fired. I nearly dropped the phone. What? About an hour ago. Security escorted him out just like they did with you. But get this, it wasn't for the Ellington thing. Apparently, someone in HR found emails proving that he'd been doing this same thing to other employees for years. Timing their terminations to steal commissions, then bad-mouthing them to clients and industry contacts. The room seemed to spin around me. How did they find out? Nobody knows for sure, but there are rumors that someone forwarded evidence to the executive team. Screenshots of emails, recordings of phone calls, documentation of his pattern of behavior. I had a pretty good idea who that someone might have been. Derek had been thorough in his investigation of Maxwell and Holt's practices, and he'd mentioned discovering some interesting patterns in Richard's employment history. What's happening to the accounts he was managing? They're scrambling to reassign everything. And here's the really crazy part. 3 more clients have called this week asking why their account managers were terminated without notice. Apparently, Richard had been pulling the same scam with other people too. The full scope of Richard's systematic fraud was staggering. For years, he'd been manipulating termination timing to steal commissions from his sales staff, then working to destroy their professional reputations to cover his tracks. I wasn't his first victim, just his most recent one. Sarah, can you do me a favor? Anything. If anyone asks about me, just tell them the truth. Richard tried to steal my commission, and I found a legal way to keep what I'd earned. I think everyone's figured that out already. You're kind of a legend around here right now. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in the conference room at Ellington Industries, presenting the final implementation timeline for their logistics optimization project. Marshall had invited his entire executive team to the meeting, and I could feel their attention and respect in a way I'd never experienced at Maxwell and Holt. Madeline, Marshall said as the meeting concluded, I want you to know that this transition has been seamless. Working with you directly has been more efficient and more personalized than anything we experienced with Maxwell and Holt. I'm glad to hear that, Mr. Ellington. In fact, I've been talking to some of my colleagues in the industry, Morrison Steele, Patterson Manufacturing, even some of the bigger players like Consolidated Logistics. They're all looking for the kind of straightforward, relationship-based consulting that you provide. My heart jumped. Are you suggesting referrals? I'm suggesting that you might want to start thinking bigger than one client. There's a real market for what you do, especially now that word is getting out about Maxwell and Holt's internal problems. He wasn't wrong. The industry gossip network had been buzzing with news about Richard's termination and the circumstances surrounding it. Several companies had quietly reached out to me, some looking for consulting services and others simply wanting to understand what had really happened. Marshall reached into his briefcase and pulled out a check. Your first payment, as agreed, $56,000. I stared at the check, remembering Richard's smug confidence that he'd calculated everything perfectly. He'd been right about the calculation, just wrong about who would end up with the money. There's something else, Marshall continued. Ellington Industries has been considering expanding into some new markets. and we're going to need strategic guidance on logistics and operations. Would Carter Strategic Consulting be interested in a longer-term relationship? I'm thinking something in the neighborhood of $200,000 annually. I managed to keep my voice steady despite the excitement coursing through me. We'd be very interested in discussing that opportunity. Over the following month, my business grew faster than I'd ever imagined possible. The Morrison Steel contract that Tom Harrison had mentioned turned into a 6-month engagement worth $40,000. 2 other Ellington referrals became clients, each bringing their own network of potential opportunities. But the most satisfying development came from an unexpected source. Derek called me on a Thursday afternoon, barely containing his laughter. "You're going to love this," he said. "I just got off the phone with a headhunter who specializes in sales executive placement. Apparently, Richard Bowman is having trouble finding a new position. I can't say I'm surprised. It gets better. Word has gotten out about why he was terminated from Maxwell and Holt. The industry is smaller than people think, and nobody wants to hire someone with a history of defrauding their own sales staff." The poetic justice of Richard's situation wasn't lost on me. He'd spent years building his career by stealing from others and destroying their professional reputations. Now he was experiencing firsthand what it felt like to be blacklisted and whispered about. "Derek, I need to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Did you have anything to do with Maxwell and Holt finding out about Richard's pattern of behavior?" The pause on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. "Let's just say that sometimes the right information finds its way to the right people at the right time," he said finally. "Hypothetically speaking, of course." Of course. 6 months after that Friday morning termination, I was sitting in my own office space, a small but professional suite in a downtown building that catered to independent consultants and small businesses. The walls were decorated with framed contracts from my clients, and my desk was covered with project timelines and strategic plans for companies across 3 different industries. The Ellington relationship had become the foundation for everything that followed. Marshall's referrals had led to referrals from other clients, creating a network effect that generated more opportunities than I could handle alone. I'd been forced to hire 2 part-time contractors to help with research and project management. My phone rang, interrupting my review of a proposal for a new client in the automotive sector. "Carter Strategic Consulting. This is Madeline." "Madeline, it's Tom Harrison at Morrison Steel. I hope you have a few minutes to talk." "Of course, Tom. What can I do for you?" "We've been so impressed with your work on our distribution optimization project that we'd like to discuss expanding our relationship. We're looking at some potential acquisitions, and we need someone who understands our operations to help evaluate the logistics integration challenges." I reached for my calendar, already mentally calculating the scope and timeline for the kind of project Tom was describing. "I'd be happy to discuss that. When would be good for an initial meeting?" "How about next Tuesday?" "And Madeline, you should know that we've been talking to some of our industry partners about your work. I think you're going to be getting some interesting calls in the next few weeks." After hanging up with Tom, I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window at the city skyline. A year ago, I'd been sitting in a cubicle at Maxwell and Holt, worried about meeting Richard's arbitrary sales targets and hoping my commission checks would clear on time. Now I was running my own company, working with industry leaders who respected my expertise and valued my strategic insights. The irony wasn't lost on me that Richard's greed and cruelty had inadvertently launched me into a more successful and fulfilling career than I'd ever imagined possible. His attempt to steal $56,000 from me had backfired spectacularly, costing him his job, his reputation, and his future in the industry. But the most satisfying part wasn't Richard's downfall. It was the realization that I'd built something genuine and sustainable, based on the relationships and expertise I'd developed over years of hard work. The clients who worked with me now did so because they trusted my judgment and valued my contributions, not because they were locked into exclusive contracts with a larger firm. My success wasn't just revenge against Richard, it was proof that his cynical worldview was wrong. You didn't have to step on others to get ahead. You didn't have to steal credit or sabotage colleagues to build a career. Sometimes the best revenge was simply being better than the people who had underestimated you. As I prepared to leave the office that evening, I reflected on the lessons I'd learned from the whole experience. Richard had taught me that corporate loyalty was often a one-way street, and that I needed to protect my own interests because no one else would. But Marshall Ellington had taught me that there were still people in business who valued integrity and personal relationships over short-term financial gain. The combination of those lessons had made me a better consultant and a more confident businesswoman. I no longer worried about arbitrary performance metrics or office politics. Instead, I focused on delivering real value to clients who appreciated what I brought to their organizations. That night, I treated myself to dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown, the kind of place I'd always considered too expensive when I was living paycheck to paycheck at Maxwell and Holt. As I raised my glass of wine in a private toast to my success, I couldn't help but smile at the memory of Richard's confidence that he'd outmaneuvered me. He thought he was playing chess while I was playing checkers. What he'd failed to realize was that I'd been playing an entirely different game, one where the rules rewarded preparation, relationship building, and long-term thinking over short-term manipulation and greed. The $56,000 he'd tried to steal had become the seed money for a business that was generating 3 times that amount every quarter. The commission he'd coveted so desperately had been just the beginning of what I was capable of earning when I controlled my own destiny. But beyond the financial success, there was something deeper that made the whole experience worthwhile. For the first time in my career, I was working with people who saw me as a valuable partner rather than an expendable employee. My clients sought out my opinions and trusted my recommendations because they knew I had their best interests at heart. That sense of professional respect and personal agency was worth more than any commission or salary. It was the foundation for a career that could grow and evolve based on my own choices and ambitions, rather than the arbitrary decisions of someone like Richard. As I walked home from the restaurant, I thought about the other employees at Maxwell and Holt who might be facing the same kind of treatment I'd endured. Sarah had mentioned that the company was struggling to rebuild trust with clients after the scandal surrounding Richard's termination. Several key accounts had requested new account managers, and there were rumors that some of the top performers were considering other opportunities. I made a mental note to reach out discreetly to some of my former colleagues. Carter's strategic consulting was growing quickly, and I could use experienced professionals who understood the industry and shared my commitment to ethical business practices. There was a certain poetic justice in the idea of building my team with people who'd escaped from Maxwell and Holt's toxic culture. The future felt full of possibilities in a way it never had when I was working for someone else. I was no longer at the mercy of Richard's moods or the company's arbitrary policy changes. My success was directly tied to the value I created for clients, and I had complete control over the standards and practices that would define my business. 6 months later, Carter's Strategic Consulting had grown from a one-person operation to a team of 5 consultants specializing in different aspects of logistics and operations management. We'd moved to larger office space and were handling projects for some of the most respected companies in our region. The Ellington relationship continued to be our flagship engagement, but it was no longer our only significant client. The automotive project Tom Harrison had mentioned had led to 3 additional contracts in that sector. A referral from one of Derek's law firm clients had opened doors in the pharmaceutical industry, and word-of-mouth recommendations from satisfied clients were generating more opportunities than we could accept. But the most gratifying development came from an unexpected source. Sarah Chen had left Maxwell and Holt and joined our team as our operations manager, bringing with her insights into the industry's best practices and a deep understanding of the pitfalls we needed to avoid. "You know what I think is funny?" Sarah said one afternoon as we were reviewing quarterly financials. "Richard used to talk all the time about how he was building something bigger than himself, how he was creating a legacy in the industry. And instead he became a cautionary tale," I replied. "Exactly. Meanwhile, you actually are building something that's going to last. Companies that treat their people right, clients who trust your judgment, a reputation based on real results instead of manipulation and politics." Sarah was right. We'd built Carter's Strategic Consulting on principles that were the opposite of everything Richard had represented. We treated our team members as partners in our success rather than expendable resources. We were transparent with clients about our capabilities and limitations. And we focused on delivering sustainable value rather than maximizing short-term profits. The contrast with my experience at Maxwell & Holt couldn't have been more stark. Instead of dreading Monday mornings and office politics, I looked forward to the challenges and opportunities each day brought. Instead of worrying about arbitrary performance metrics and commission calculations, I focused on solving real problems for clients who valued our expertise. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of our success was knowing that it had been built ethically and sustainably. We hadn't succeeded by tearing down competitors or manipulating clients. We'd succeeded by being better at what we did and more trustworthy in how we did it. That didn't mean the business was without challenges. Client expectations were higher when you were working as an independent consultant rather than as part of a larger firm. The administrative burden of running a business was significant. And there were days when I missed having someone else handle payroll and tax compliance. But those challenges were offset by the satisfaction of controlling our own destiny. When we made mistakes, we owned them and learned from them. When we succeeded, we knew it was because of our own efforts and judgment. And when opportunities arose, we could pursue them without having to navigate layers of corporate bureaucracy or worry about office politics. The industry recognition that followed our growth was gratifying in ways I hadn't expected. I was invited to speak at conferences about strategic planning and client relationship management. Trade publications featured articles about our approach to consulting and our success in building client loyalty. And several professional organizations asked me to serve on committees and advisory boards. But the moment that truly crystallized the transformation in my career came during a chance encounter at an industry conference 18 months after my termination from Maxwell & Holt. I was speaking on a panel about emerging trends in logistics consulting when I spotted a familiar face in the audience. Richard Bowman was sitting in the back row, looking older and less polished than I remembered. His perfectly pressed suits had been replaced by off-the-rack attire, and his confident demeanor had given way to something that looked like desperation. After my presentation, he approached me during the networking break. "Madeline," he said, his voice lacking its former authority. "I wondered if I might have a word with you." I studied his face, looking for signs of the arrogance and manipulation that had made my life miserable for so many years. Instead, I saw someone who looked defeated and genuinely apologetic. "Of course, Richard. What can I do for you?" "I wanted to apologize," he began, the words coming out in a rush. "What I did to you was wrong. The way I handled your termination, the commission situation, the things I said about you afterward, all of it was unprofessional and unethical." I waited for him to continue, curious about where this conversation was heading. "I've had a lot of time to think about my actions over the past year and a half," he continued. "I've been out of work for most of that time, and I've heard from several people about how well you're doing with your own company. I wanted you to know that I understand now how much damage I caused, not just to you, but to other people over the years." His apology seemed genuine, and I found myself feeling something I hadn't expected: pity. Richard's systematic abuse of his position had ultimately destroyed his own career as thoroughly as he'd tried to destroy mine. "I appreciate you saying that, Richard," I replied. "I hope you're able to move forward and find success in whatever you do next. Actually, that's why I wanted to talk to you. I know this is probably presumptuous, but I wondered if you might consider giving me a reference, not for anything in sales or account management, but maybe for a support role somewhere. I've learned that I'm not cut out for positions with authority over other people." The irony of Richard asking me for help finding work was almost overwhelming. The man who had tried to destroy my career was now asking me to help salvage what remained of his own. But as I looked at him, I realized that holding on to anger and resentment would only diminish my own success and happiness. "Richard, I can't give you a reference based on our working relationship, because that wouldn't be honest or fair to any potential employer," I said carefully. "But I can tell you that there are companies in this industry that value people who've learned from their mistakes and are committed to doing better." He nodded, understanding the limitation I was placing on my assistants. I understand. Thank you for being more gracious than I deserved. As he walked away, I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't realized I'd been missing. My success wasn't diminished by his failure, and his apology didn't erase the damage he'd caused. But seeing him humbled and genuinely remorseful helped me understand that the best revenge really was living well and building something positive from the wreckage he'd created. The conference presentation that afternoon went exceptionally well. The audience was engaged and asked thoughtful questions about our approach to client relationships and strategic planning. Several attendees approached me afterward with business cards and requests for follow-up conversations about potential consulting opportunities. But the interaction that proved most valuable came from an unexpected source. During the final networking session, I was approached by Dr. Patricia Williams, the Chief Operating Officer of Meridian Healthcare Systems, one of the largest healthcare networks in the region. "Ms. Carter," she said, extending her hand. "I attended your presentation this afternoon and was impressed by your insights into relationship-based consulting. Meridian is facing some significant logistics challenges as we expand our operations. And I think your approach might be exactly what we need." Healthcare was an industry I'd never worked in directly, but the principles of logistics optimization and strategic planning were transferable across sectors. "I'd be very interested in learning more about your challenges, Dr. Williams. We're opening 3 new facilities over the next 18 months, and our current supply chain management system isn't equipped to handle the increased complexity. We need someone who can help us design scalable processes and maintain quality standards while we grow." The scope of what she was describing was larger than any project Carter's strategic consulting had tackled, but it was exactly the kind of challenge that excited me. "That sounds like a complex but fascinating project. Would you be available for a preliminary discussion next week?" "Actually, I'd prefer to move more quickly than that. Would you be available to visit our headquarters this Friday? I'd like you to meet with our executive team and get a first-hand look at our current operations." By the time I returned home from the conference, my calendar was full of follow-up meetings and my inbox was overflowing with inquiries from potential clients. The success of Carter Strategic Consulting had reached a tipping point where our reputation was generating more opportunities than we could reasonably handle. That evening, I called a team meeting to discuss our growth trajectory and the decisions we needed to make about expanding our capabilities. Sarah, our 2 full-time consultants, and our part-time contractors gathered in our conference room to review the opportunities that had emerged from the conference. "We're at a crossroads," I explained. "We can either continue growing gradually with the types of projects we're comfortable handling, or we can take some bigger risks and pursue opportunities that will stretch our capabilities but potentially transform the business." The healthcare project Dr. Williams had described was a perfect example of this dilemma. It would require us to hire additional staff, possibly lease larger office space, and invest in new systems and processes. The financial rewards could be substantial, but so were the risks. "What does your gut tell you?" asked James Morrison, our senior logistics consultant who had joined us 6 months earlier after leaving a much larger firm. "My gut tells me that we didn't build this company to play it safe," I replied. "We built it to solve complex problems for clients who value our expertise. If we're not challenging ourselves, we're not growing." The discussion that followed was exactly the kind of strategic planning session I'd always wished I could have at Maxwell & Holt. Everyone's opinion was valued, concerns were addressed honestly, and decisions were made based on what was best for both our team and our clients, rather than arbitrary corporate metrics or personal politics. By the end of the meeting, we had a plan for controlled expansion that would allow us to pursue larger opportunities while maintaining the quality and personal service that had become our trademark. We would hire 2 additional consultants, invest in project management software that could handle more complex engagements, and develop partnerships with specialized contractors who could supplement our capabilities when needed. The Meridian Healthcare project became the centerpiece of our expansion strategy. After the initial site visit and presentation, Dr. Williams offered us a contract worth $300,000 over 18 months, with the possibility of additional work as their expansion continued. But what made the project truly special wasn't just its size or financial value. It was the opportunity to work with a leadership team that shared our values about ethical business practices and long-term relationship building. Dr. Williams and her colleagues were focused on improving patient care and community health outcomes, not just maximizing profits or market share. The complexity of healthcare logistics presented challenges we'd never encountered in manufacturing or retail consulting. Medical supplies had strict regulatory requirements and expiration dates. Patient care couldn't be compromised by inventory shortages or delivery delays. And the integration of new facilities into an existing network required coordination across multiple departments and regulatory jurisdictions. But those challenges were exactly what made the work rewarding. Every problem we solved had a direct impact on the quality of care that patients received. Every efficiency we created freed up resources that could be invested in better equipment or additional staff. And every successful implementation validated our belief that strategic consulting could create genuine value for organizations and the communities they served. 6 months into the Meridian project, Carter's Strategic Consulting had grown to 12 employees and was handling consulting engagements across 4 different industries. Our office space had expanded to include a dedicated project management center and a small conference facility where clients could meet with our entire team. But the growth hadn't come at the expense of the personal relationships and ethical standards that had defined our early success. If anything, our larger size had allowed us to be more selective about the clients we worked with and more thorough in our approach to problem solving. The contrast with my experience at Maxwell & Holt was striking in ways both large and small. Instead of being pressured to accept any client who could pay our fees, we now had the luxury of choosing engagements that aligned with our expertise and values. Instead of competing with colleagues for recognition and resources, our team members collaborated to deliver the best possible results for clients. And instead of worrying about arbitrary performance metrics or commission calculations, I focused on building sustainable value for both our clients and our employees. The financial success followed naturally from that focus, but it was no longer the primary measure of our achievement. The industry recognition that had begun with conference presentations and trade publication articles evolved into something more substantial. Carter's Strategic Consulting was invited to participate in research studies about best practices in consulting. Our case studies were featured in academic journals and business school curricula, and several of our team members were recruited to serve on professional boards and advisory committees. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from our clients themselves. The testimonials and referrals we received weren't just about the financial results we'd achieved, but about the collaborative approach and ethical standards that defined our work. Companies spoke about how our engagement had improved not just their operational efficiency, but their organizational culture and employee satisfaction. 2 years after my termination from Maxwell & Holt, I received an unexpected phone call from someone I hadn't heard from since that traumatic Friday morning. "Madeline, this is David Chen, the CEO of Maxwell & Holt. I hope you have a few minutes to talk." I recognized the name but had never spoken directly with the company's chief executive during my employment there. "Of course, Mr. Chen, what can I do for you?" "I'm calling to discuss a potential consulting engagement. Maxwell & Holt is facing some significant challenges with client retention and employee satisfaction, and we're looking for an outside perspective on how to address these issues." 1. The irony of the situation was almost surreal. The company that had fired me to steal my commission was now asking to hire me as a consultant to help solve problems that were at least partially the result of the toxic culture that had led to my termination. "That's an interesting request. Mr. Chen, can you tell me more about the specific challenges you're facing?" "We've lost several major clients over the past 18 months, including some long-standing relationships that we thought were secure. Our employee turnover rate has increased significantly. And exit interviews suggest that people are leaving because they don't trust management or feel valued by the organization." I knew from industry contacts that Maxwell & Holt had been struggling since Richard's termination and the subsequent revelations about his systematic fraud. Several of their top performers had left for other companies, and their reputation in the industry had been damaged by the scandal. And you think Carter Strategic Consulting might be able to help address these issues? Frankly, yes. Your reputation in the industry is excellent, and several people have suggested that your approach to relationship building and ethical business practices might be exactly what we need to rebuild trust with both clients and employees. The request put me in an interesting position. Part of me was tempted to simply decline and move on, given the history between us. But another part of me saw an opportunity to make a positive impact on an organization that still employed good people who deserved better leadership and more ethical management practices. Mr. Chen, I appreciate you thinking of us for this engagement. However, given my history with Maxwell and Holt, I think it's important that we discuss some potential conflicts of interest before proceeding. I'm aware of the circumstances surrounding your departure, Madeline. Richard Bowman's actions were unacceptable, and they don't represent the values that Maxwell and Holt is trying to embody going forward. I'm glad to hear that. If we were to consider this engagement, it would need to include a thorough review of your employment practices, commission structures, and management accountability systems. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny? We are. In fact, that's exactly the kind of comprehensive review we're looking for. After discussing the proposal with my team and Derek, I decided to accept the Maxwell and Holt engagement with several important conditions. The contract would include provisions for complete independence in our analysis and recommendations. We would have access to all relevant documents and personnel, and our final report would be presented to the board of directors as well as the executive team. The project that followed was one of the most challenging and satisfying of my career. Working inside Maxwell and Holt as a consultant rather than an employee gave me a unique perspective on the systemic issues that had created the toxic culture I'd experienced. The problems went far beyond Richard's individual misconduct. The company's commission structure created perverse incentives for managers to manipulate termination timing. Performance evaluation systems were subjective and inconsistent, and there was no meaningful oversight of how managers treated their direct reports. But there were also strengths to build upon. Many of the individual contributors were talented and dedicated professionals who wanted to do good work for their clients. The company's technical capabilities were solid, and their industry expertise was genuine. What they needed was leadership that could channel those strengths into sustainable success. Our recommendations included comprehensive reforms to the compensation system, new accountability measures for management, and training programs focused on ethical leadership and relationship building. We also suggested creating employee advocacy positions and regular culture assessments to prevent future problems. The implementation of these recommendations took place over several months, with Carter Strategic Consulting providing ongoing support and monitoring. The changes weren't always popular with existing management, but the board of directors was committed to rebuilding the company's reputation and creating a more sustainable business model. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Within 6 months, employee satisfaction scores had improved dramatically. Client retention rates stabilized and began to improve. And several former employees who had left during the Richard Bowman era expressed interest in returning to the company. But the most gratifying aspect of the engagement was seeing the positive impact on individual employees who had been struggling under the previous system. People who had been demoralized and frustrated began to re-engage with their work. Teams that had been paralyzed by internal competition started collaborating effectively. And the overall atmosphere in the office shifted from suspicion and fear to optimism and mutual support. The success of the Maxwell and Holt project established Carter Strategic Consulting as a leader in organizational transformation and culture change. Companies across multiple industries began reaching out to us for help with similar challenges, recognizing that operational efficiency and financial performance were closely linked to employee satisfaction and ethical leadership. But beyond the business success, the project provided me with a sense of personal closure that I hadn't anticipated. Working to heal the damage that Richard's behavior had caused felt like a more complete form of justice than simply seeing him fail. It was an opportunity to create positive change for people who were still dealing with the consequences of his actions. 3 years after that Friday morning termination, Carter Strategic Consulting had become one of the most respected consulting firms in our region. We employed 22 people, worked with clients across 6 different industries, and had been recognized by multiple professional organizations for our contributions to ethical business practices and organizational excellence. The financial success had exceeded my wildest expectations from those early days when I was worried about paying off student loans. The company was generating annual revenue in the mid-seven figures, and my personal income was more than 10 times what I'd been earning at Maxwell and Holt. But the numbers only told part of the story. The real measure of our success was the impact we were having on the organizations and people we worked with. Companies that engaged with us didn't just become more efficient or profitable, they became better places to work and more valuable partners to their clients. The team we'd built reflected the values that had guided us from the beginning. Everyone was treated as a partner in our success, with compensation tied to both individual performance and company-wide results. Professional development was a priority, with time and resources allocated for training, conference attendance, and continuing education. And decision-making was collaborative, with input from all team members regardless of their seniority or title. Looking back on the journey from that devastating Friday morning to our current success, I was struck by how much the experience had changed, not just my career trajectory, but my understanding of what it meant to build something meaningful and sustainable. Richard's attempt to steal my commission had been motivated by short-term greed and a zero-sum view of business success. He believed that for him to win, someone else had to lose. His approach to management was based on control, manipulation, and the exploitation of power imbalances. The success of Carter's strategic consulting had proven that there was a better way. We'd built our business on the principle that everyone's success was interconnected. Clients succeeded when we delivered genuine value. Employees succeeded when they were given opportunities to grow and contribute. And the company succeeded when everyone was working toward shared goals with mutual respect and trust. That philosophical difference had practical implications that went far beyond our organizational culture. Clients preferred working with consultants who saw them as partners rather than revenue sources. Employees performed better when they felt valued and trusted. And the business relationships we built were more sustainable because they were based on genuine mutual benefit rather than short-term transactions. As I sat in my office that evening, reviewing the quarterly reports that showed continued growth across all our business lines, I reflected on the unexpected ways that career setbacks could become opportunities for transformation. Without Richard's betrayal, I might never have discovered my potential as an entrepreneur and leader. Without the necessity of starting over, I might never have built something that aligned so completely with my values and aspirations. The $56,000 he'd tried to steal had become the seed money for a business worth millions. The humiliation he'd intended to inflict had become the motivation for achievements beyond anything I'd thought possible. And the professional reputation he'd tried to destroy had been rebuilt stronger and more authentic than ever before. But the most important lesson from the entire experience wasn't about revenge or career success. It was about the power of maintaining integrity and focusing on genuine value creation, even when faced with betrayal and injustice. The temptation to respond to Richard's behavior with similar tactics had been real. But resisting that temptation had made all the difference. Instead of trying to destroy his career the way he'd tried to destroy mine, I'd focused on building something positive. Instead of seeking revenge through sabotage or manipulation, I'd let the natural consequences of his actions unfold while I concentrated on creating value for clients and opportunities for my team. That approach had proven more effective than any revenge scheme could have been. Richard's career had imploded under the weight of his own unethical behavior, while mine had flourished because it was built on principles that could sustain long-term success. As I prepared to leave the office and head home to celebrate another successful quarter with my team, I thought about the phone call I'd received earlier that day from Marshall Ellington. He'd called to congratulate me on Carter Strategic Consulting's recognition as Consultant of the Year by the Regional Business Association. But our conversation had turned to broader themes about leadership and business ethics. "You know, Madeline," he'd said, "when I first met you, I could tell you were different from the typical sales representatives we dealt with. You were more interested in understanding our business than in pushing your company's services. That made all the difference in building trust." I learned early in my career that the best client relationships are built on genuine understanding and mutual respect. I'd replied, "That's exactly right. And it's why your company has been so successful. You've proven that doing business ethically isn't just the right thing to do morally. It's also the most effective approach financially." Marshall's observation had captured something essential about the journey from that Friday morning termination to our current success. The principles that had guided Carter's strategic consulting weren't just ethical imperatives. They were practical strategies for building sustainable competitive advantages. Companies that treated their employees well attracted and retained better talent. Consultants who focused on genuine value creation built stronger client relationships. And businesses that operated with transparency and integrity developed reputations that generated referrals and repeat business. These weren't revolutionary insights, but they were principles that were often overlooked in pursuit of short-term gains or competitive advantages. Richard's downfall had demonstrated the ultimate futility of tactics based on deception and exploitation. My success had proven the enduring power of approaches based on authenticity and mutual benefit. As I walked through the office, turning off lights and checking that everything was secure for the weekend, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction that went beyond financial metrics or professional recognition. We'd built something that made a positive difference in the world, something that created value for clients, opportunities for employees, and returns for investors without compromising our principles or exploiting others. The contrast with my final days at Maxwell & Holt couldn't have been more dramatic. Instead of dreading Monday mornings and office politics, I looked forward to the challenges and opportunities each week would bring. Instead of competing with colleagues for recognition and resources, I collaborated with partners who shared my commitment to excellence and ethical practices. And instead of worrying about the arbitrary decisions of managers like Richard, I had the autonomy to make choices based on what was best for our clients, our team, and our long-term success. That sense of agency and purpose had transformed not just my career, but my entire perspective on what it meant to build a meaningful professional life. The weekend ahead would be spent with family and friends, people who had supported me through the difficult transition from employee to entrepreneur and who continued to celebrate our successes. But Monday morning would bring new challenges and opportunities, new clients to serve, and new problems to solve. And I couldn't wait to get started. The story of my transformation from a fired employee to a successful entrepreneur wasn't really about revenge. Despite how it might have appeared from the outside, it was about the power of resilience, integrity, and vision to create opportunities from adversity and build something meaningful from the wreckage of betrayal. Richard had given me an unexpected gift when he fired me to steal my commission. He'd forced me to discover capabilities I didn't know I possessed and to build something that aligned completely with my values and aspirations. His betrayal had been the catalyst for my liberation from a system that would never have rewarded my best qualities or allowed me to reach my full potential. In trying to destroy my career, he'd inadvertently launched me toward achievements that exceeded anything I could have accomplished as his employee. His attempt to steal $56,000 had cost him his reputation, his job, and his future in the industry, while creating the foundation for my seven-figure business. That was the real lesson of the entire experience. When you build something based on genuine value creation and ethical principles, you don't need to destroy others to succeed. The market rewards authenticity and competence over manipulation and fraud. And the career satisfaction that comes from doing meaningful work with people you respect is worth more than any commission or salary. As I locked the office door and walked toward my car, I smiled at the memory of Richard's confident prediction that clients wouldn't work with me without the backing of Maxwell & Holt. He'd been wrong about that, just as he'd been wrong about everything else that mattered. The clients who mattered most, people like Marshall Ellington and Dr. Patricia Williams, hadn't been loyal to a company or a brand. They'd been loyal to the relationships we'd built and the value we'd created together. When I'd struck out on my own, they'd followed because they trusted my judgment and valued my commitment to their success. That was the foundation of everything we'd built at Carter Strategic Consulting, genuine relationships based on mutual respect and shared commitment to excellence. It was a simple concept, but it had proven more powerful than any of the manipulative tactics or exploitative practices that characterize too much of the business world. And it had made possible a level of professional success and personal satisfaction that I never could have imagined during those dark days immediately after my termination. The future was full of possibilities, and I controlled my own destiny in ways that would have been impossible as someone else's employee. That was the best revenge of all, not just surviving Richard's betrayal, but thriving because of the opportunities it had created. He'd thought he was ending my career, but he'd actually been launching it toward achievements that neither of us could have predicted. And the story was far from over.